Hello and welcome into a Slice of Life hour for your dose of do-it-yourself motivation. And as usual, helping us help ourselves, we've got my guest today. She is a licensed clinical child psychologist with more than 30 years experience counseling children with special needs and their families. She is currently Associate Professor and Head of Psychological Studies Academic Group at the National Institute of Education in Singapore. And her research interests include the social and emotional development of gifted children, mobile behavioral health, and psychological interventions to improve well-being. And another word for well-being is happiness. That's what we're talking about today as well. What can we do to increase our happiness or well-being? Is it just a chemical? And if it is, can we induce happiness? Can we create happiness, so to speak? You know, does happiness simply mean smiling and laughing a lot? Let's find out more. Let's pick the brains of Maureen Neihart today. Hi, Maureen. Welcome into the show.
Hi, Eugene. Thank you.
Very glad you could join us today. So first of all, let me get your perspective. Obviously, happiness is huge. You know, different people have different definitions of happiness. What is your personal?
I think it's easiest to think about happiness as how satisfied you are with your life. Are you achieving the things that are most valuable to you?
So a general feeling of wellness. Okay.
And satisfaction.
Okay. So do you think then, just anecdotally from your own experience then, time spent here in Singapore, do you think Singaporeans are generally
That's a really interesting question. Are Singaporeans happy?
Yes.
I'm not sure if Singaporeans are happy or how happy they are. I've noticed over the last few years that there's some evidence, I think, to suggest that Singaporeans could be a lot happier. And I think, for example, our recent exercise with the Singapore conversation that was conducted for over a couple of years, indicated that there are things that people aspire to. And there's certainly lots of buzz. We joke about how much we like to complain, that complaining is a national sport in Singapore. So that's certainly relevant to happiness. And the Gallup poll that was published in 2011, that got a lot of buzz too, that Singapore is the least emotional nation in the world. Out of 148 countries, we ranked last in emotionless.
So there are a lot of surveys, numbers, statistics that kind of like point, perhaps indicate the level of unhappiness, right, in Singapore, which probably also relates to non-satisfaction, because if you complain and you whine a lot, obviously you're not satisfied. But perhaps then we're talking about just certain aspects of people's lives, and perhaps amplified by a lot of different things as well. But let's talk about, happiness as you know it, as you defined earlier, is satisfaction, a state of general wellness. What contributes to this state?
Well, we know that there are three things that contribute to people's overall happiness or satisfaction. They're your genetics. You have a set point kind of for happiness, and about 50% of your happiness is contributed by genetics. And
so you're born with it?
You're born with a range, let's say, not with a set point, but maybe a range within which you're likely to vary during your life. And then, interestingly, life circumstances only contribute about 10%. And that's where most people tend to be wrong about happiness, because it's, I think, general human nature that we think if we change our circumstances, we'll be happier. But actually, research consistently doesn't support that. I think people's own experience will tell them that if you have more money, if you get a new bag, if you get a new car, if you get a new partner, you might get a momentary lift, but it doesn't really last. But interestingly, 40% of your happiness is contributed to by choices that you make, intentional activities or things that you choose to do or not do. So that's where you can really manipulate your happiness and perhaps improve your satisfaction. And that's what we're trying to understand more about.
So happiness, is a state of mind, but obviously what we do in the physical realm contributes to how we feel.
Because your feelings and your behavior are connected. You know that from music, for example, that you can actually change how you feel by choosing to listen to certain kinds of music, for example.
Yeah. So that's interesting, see, because then we talk about certain things being able to give us a lift, fleeting, temporary sort of like like an upper. But the tricky thing is maintaining that.
Very good point.
Up. So that's what we're trying to find.
Yeah. So what's really fascinating, I think, about that is that we do have quite good, robust research at this point to tell us that that feeling good, that momentary lift that you get, actually can have long-term benefits when you turn those activities into habits. It's called the broaden and build theory, but it's the idea that feeling good isn't just about the feeling. It actually changes things in your brain so that you build resources and mindsets that you can draw on later when you face more challenging circumstances. It actually builds your skills. Positive emotion, yeah.
It's like a bank, isn't it?
Yeah, you can think of it that way.
Internal bank account that you can just, fill up from time to time.
Sure. Yeah, you can think of it that way.
So that means, whatever state that we might be in the moment, we can still be happier. So the key is in this kind of like 40% that you mentioned, because 50% we're kind of like it's inherent. Some of us have more cheerful dispositions, perhaps,
Some people are prone to depression.
Yes, genetically. And then 10% is circumstance, environment. Perhaps you were brought up in a very optimistic, cheerful family as well. That also kind of like contributes.
Sure, maybe you're being raised in poverty. That will make a difference.
Yes, absolutely. So that's this 40% that we are concentrating on then. Right. Let's talk about what we can do to kind of like increase or what we can do to this 40% that we can actually control in terms of happiness. Coming up here on the show on a Slice of Life Hour with me, Eugene Loh, I'm talking with Maureen Neihart, who is associate professor and head of psychological studies academic group at the National Institute of Education. More in just a while. We all want happiness, and to a certain extent, everything that we do actually kind of like works towards that joy, finding that joy for ourselves and for the people we care about, which in turn gives us joy as well. Making the people we care about happy. So we're talking about happiness today, and why some of us find it so elusive. We talked about things that we can do, activities that give us a lift, that give us that up. But it's temporary, it's fleeting. So how can we kind of like maintain a certain level of well-being, wellness, or happiness? And you've had quite a bit of experience working with Asians and Westerners on this topic of happiness. I mean, I don't really like to kind of like segregate people in that sense, but there are undeniably certain distinctions. For example, say a Western person might find happiness in traveling around the world alone, but perhaps an Asian person might find it very lonely. So there are certain things like that. So share with us your own experience as to, are there any differences between?
Well, there are some differences. There are very clearly some differences. And that's one of the challenges in trying to implement some of the research and make recommendations to people about how to be happier. Because what makes people happier in, say, Western contexts is not necessarily what people want in other contexts, like Asian contexts. I'll give you a specific example. There's been one study that was done that demonstrated that people in Taiwan, for example, when you ask them how do they want to feel, ideally how they want to feel is contented, serene, or at peace. But if you ask Americans how they want to feel excited, enthusiastic, full of joy. In other words, Westerners tend to want to feel these high arousal kinds of states, whereas Easterners, to speak very generically, might want to feel more, not so high arousal, more low arousal kind of states. And this might help us understand the Gallup poll results, for example, why Singaporeans came across as less emotional, because it's not their high value, perhaps, to have these higher arousal kind of states. We don't really know because we don't have local data yet to tell us. But so that's one difference. Another difference is you compare individualistic kinds of societies like Australians or Europeans with collectivist societies. We said earlier that happiness is about achieving what you most desire. Well, individualistic kinds of goals are not necessarily what people most desire in collectivist kinds of societies. Oftentimes it's about the group in collectivist societies.
It's about the family.
Yeah, it's about the family. It's about filial piety, for example. You know, we can think of people for whom filial piety, for instance, is a very high value, and they might be very satisfied with their life, very happy if they perceive that they are a dutiful son or a very good daughter. Whereas that wouldn't even be on the radar of someone who's growing up in a Western individualistic kind of society.
So do you find that perhaps in Singapore, where, for lack of a better word, we are kind of like more Asian, that there are certain things we can learn from Western perceptions of happiness?
Yeah, I think there are things that we can try. I think there are things that probably apply. For instance, the feeling of gratitude. There's been a lot of work on gratitude, and people who are grateful are happier. And I think when you look at across world religions and across cultures, thankfulness is something that is valued and that people do try to promote. And so this evidence that we have that if you can build your gratitude, you will be happier is probably something that we should apply even here in Singapore.
Okay, going back to your observation about how perhaps in the West people go for more high arousal sort of, and that to them means happiness. That sounds like something that is that much harder to do, isn't it? I mean, how do you keep that high arousal feeling, going?
Well, what strikes me about that, Eugene, is that it might seem hard to you because you're Singaporean, but it might not seem so difficult to someone who's Australian or Italian or...
I see. How do you do it?
Well, I use exercise myself. I really like physical activity and being outdoors. So, and physical activity, exercise, is something that consistently you get very good outcomes for across cultural groups. It's like the miracle drug. Exercise is probably the one vaccine, if you will, that you could use that would really protect you the best from future depression and despair and would keep your mood up because it affects your serotonin levels in your brain, which protects you against depression and anxiety.
Yes.
So it's really exercise is about your body chemistry.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I do.
It all feeds in, right? It's quite holistic in that sense because, I mean, just talking about physical exercise, from that you get the endorphins running and then your appetite is great. Obviously, you sleep well as well, so all that, good sleep also affects,
right.
how
There's
your moods.
Lots of positive outcomes for people who exercise.
So it's really quite holistic. We're talking about like the physical exercise that you do as well. And of course, there's the psychological side of it. What sort of mindsets do you think contribute to this sense of happiness? You mentioned gratitude.
Two others that we know of are hope. Obviously, people who have hope tend to stay motivated and tend to stay engaged. Once you lose hope, then you're more prone to depression and despair, and also you tend to disengage from activities. So if you don't feel hopeful, this outlook that good things are possible, that's the mindset that there's maybe a benevolent force in the universe looking out for you, or that all things work together for good, or that anything's possible if you work hard enough. Those kinds of ideas will keep you approaching or keep you making an effort.
So hope, i.e. faith.
Faith, or just hope in it can be hope in yourself. Doesn't necessarily have to be hope in a greater power, but hope maybe in your family or your support network that you have. But this belief, a strong belief that good things are coming. Related to that is a sense of the mindset of optimism, which is not this empty pie in the sky kind of Pollyanna thinking that, I'm a good and wonderful person no matter what. It's not that. It's about looking realistically at your circumstances and seeing the possibilities. Again, that there are multiple explanations for things. Even if you take a primary 2 student who has not been invited to a party that a lot of his classmates have been invited to, he might personalize that. He might think about it very pessimistically. Nobody likes me. I didn't get asked because I have no friends. When in reality, there could be 20 good reasons why he didn't get invited to this party. So we can help him become more optimistic, develop this optimistic mindset by helping him look at alternative explanations for things.
That's why 40% is within our control, within our minds, because there's so many ways of looking at it, and it's all about choosing the more enabling, the more positive meaning from any sort of situation, really, right? Yep. And we're chatting today with Maureen Neihart, who is Associate Professor of Psychological Studies Academic Group at the National Institute of Education, talking more about happiness and well-being. And we talked about how 40%, so 40% of the happiness is what is within our control, is it?
That's right.
Okay. Let's continue to chat with Maureen in just a while after headline news, sports and business, some specific strategies that we can use to increase our happiness or well-being. And is there any strategy guaranteed to improve our happiness? That's your takeaway for today on my show. Here's a slice of life on 938 Live. I'm Eugene Loh. Do stay with me as we continue to chat with Maureen in about 15 minutes. 938 Live. Happiness is a state of mind, or is it a state of mind? As my guest Maureen Neihart puts it, that's the title of her most recent book, Happiness is a State of Mind, M-I-N-E, published by Armour. It is available at bookstores here and online as well. Maureen Neihart, besides being an author, she's also an associate professor of psychological studies, academic group at the National Institute of Education in Singapore, and doing a lot of research currently involving social and emotional development of gifted children, mobile behavioral health, and psychological interventions to improve well-being. What are some of these interventions, Maureen?
Well, one we've kind of alluded to, and that is just to boost your positive emotion. So there's something called scheduling pleasurable activities, where you actually make room in your schedule and you put down a time for it, maybe twice a week, that you do things that you know make you feel very good.
All right.
It sounds so simple, and yet you might be surprised how many Singaporeans don't actually have much room in their schedule for pleasurable activities. They don't make time for it. Another thing that we've also talked about is relationships. You know, one of the best predictors of positive outcomes for people is the strength of their connections with others. And in fact, some people have said that it's poverty in friends, not poverty in dollars at the end of life, that makes the most difference, which I think resonates with people's experience as well. So anything that you can do to strengthen your relationships, and I'll give you a couple of examples here. One is how you respond when people share good news with you. I think we sort of naturally understand that when people share bad news, you're supposed to be sympathetic and empathic, etc. But it turns out that it makes a difference how you respond when people share good news with you as well. So say, for example, your neighbor tells you that her son has won an award at school. Some people might not say anything. They just don't acknowledge her remark at all. And other people might change the subject, which is a bit of a rebuff, and people feel put off by those comments. But a lot of us might just tend to say, well, congratulations, or good for him, or I'm glad to hear it, which is a nice thing and helps people feel good. But what research would indicate is if you take it one step further and invite the person to tell you a little bit more about it, you will actually strengthen that relationship. And you don't have to take my word for it, Eugene. You can try your own experiment. You can think of a relationship that you have that maybe isn't as strong as you like or is a little conflictual, and you can try this. It's called active constructive responding. So when they share something positive, acknowledge it, and then ask them, tell me a little bit more about that, or what did he have to do to win that award? Yeah,
it's one of the things they teach you when it comes to like making great first impressions as well. Okay. The focus on the other person, right? Yeah, the interest should be on the other party, on your date, not yourself, or what you're going to have on the menu or something. You know,
it'll strengthen your relationships.
Relationships, huge. That kind of human connection, you know, and that brings me to another part of happiness, another component of happiness, which is so important as well. That is, after sort of like feeding ourselves or nourishing ourselves, ultimately we find that, you know, helping others, nourishing other people helps us feel happy as well.
That's right. And that's an area where I think naturally people intuitively understand that, you feel it's better to give than to receive. The research, we don't have much research on that to say whether or not that really does improve people's well-being. There's some that say that people who give of their time do better than people who don't. But I think it's more because that research is hard to do. It's not that we don't have the data. It's just we don't have that much research because it's not so easy research to conduct.
Yeah, but it's so fascinating, isn't it?
Yes,
This
it
power of giving. Why does giving make us feel fulfilled? Is it ultimately self-indulgent as well, or is there something really altruistic about the human condition that really can be cultivated?
Sure, and it relates to what we've been talking about nationally regarding becoming a more gracious society and the kindness movement that we have. There are research studies that tell us that doing kind acts, people who do more kind acts are happier, report greater life satisfaction than people who report fewer kind acts. So there does seem to be some support for this idea of doing good deeds for other people.
Yeah. And of course, it all boils down eventually to the individual, right? Because what fulfills a person might not be the same for another.
That's
I mean,
right.
some people feel that perhaps, leaving behind a meaningful legacy makes them happy, even though they may not really be very happy during their lifetimes,
That's right.
So we see that sort of spectrum as well. But let's talk about something just on a very generic basis, like, right? What sort of, are there specific strategies? Because earlier we talked about how 50% of happiness, studies have shown, is inborn, inherent, whatever, genetic. 10% is circumstantial, and then 40% is actually within your control. So what specific strategies can we use to maximize this 40%?
Well, I think a strategy, maybe it's the mindset of just being aware that you have a choice. It is possible for you to improve your well-being and your happiness. And you can choose a variety of intentional activities, whether they are things that will boost your positive emotion, like watching your positivity-negativity ratio, not only in your own self, but also in your relationships and your activities. We do have some data to tell us that people who have a ratio in their relationships of 3 positive interactions to every negative interaction do much better. They have more stable relationships. They're married longer. They're happier in their relationships than people who have less than 3 to 1. But we don't know if that's really as true in an Asian context. And it's kind of interesting to think about, isn't it? Because we have a lot more negativity in our context and culture than people in the West do.
Yeah. And then, we can see how it can go in different directions as well, because some people don't see negative interactions as necessarily negative, because from that you can actually thrash out things and then you can get to know each other better.
You need some negativity for sure to balance. There's such a thing as too much positivity, as a matter of fact. But I think the important thing is to have more positive than negative, because there's something that the negative weighs more. I mean, if you go to bed at the end of the day and 3 good things have happened and 1 not so good thing happened, our tendency is to focus on the not so good thing that happened, because it weighs more. It dominates our thinking. So it brings us down in terms of our feelings and our happiness.
Okay. And is there anything that has been, perhaps scientifically, proven to be able to improve one's sense of well-being?
Yes, there is one vaccine that I would love to leave you with that's really virtually guaranteed for everybody. And people will groan a little. In fact, you might groan a little bit when you hear it, because you've talked about it before, but that's exercise. And I'm not talking about just physical activity where you take a little stroll around your block. I'm talking about exercise in which you make enough of an effort that you're a little bit breathless, but you can still talk. There's countless research to indicate that getting regular exercise several times a week will improve all kinds of outcomes for you and your family, and will actually make you much happier in the long run.
Yeah.
So I would encourage people to start where they are, not where they wish they would be or where they think they should be. If you're a couch potato, for example, then just try to get up and move a little bit. And if you're someone who, I know a lot of Singaporeans who exercise once a week, Saturdays are their day to exercise. Okay, see if you can get in 2 more days a week. Or if you exercise quite regularly, see if you can increase the intensity of that exercise. But continue to move yourself. Am I making you think a little bit, Eugene, here about your own?
Yes, I mean, I totally agree with you. Exercise is really, it can't even be the sort of panacea to all your problems.
It's a miracle drug. It really is. It's like a miracle drug.
Yes, I mean, the difficulty is getting people, to actually do it. And when you're in that state where perhaps you're not feeling so well, that is the furthest thing from your mind. I mean, to go out for a jog, what, really? So I mean, for people who perhaps still are trying to get I mean, what I've kind of found as well personally also, that once you are first happy, then everything else kind of falls into place. Naturally, you will begin to go towards a healthier lifestyle, being nicer to people, loving people more. All that comes once you have found that fulfillment for yourself, but then, that is the core. But perhaps, to end of the show, let's talk about, let's say, if we start from the very beginning, from the fundamentals, Maureen, how would you perhaps bring someone through the process of, getting their fulfillment and well-being up there so that they can, the pieces all fall into place?
All right. If we start just with the real basics, my advice would be to begin where you are and not where someone else thinks you should be or where you would like to be ultimately. So take very small steps and extend a lot of grace to yourself. So really just take a little bit of a reach and not too far a reach. And then focus on positive emotion. This is really fundamental, making sure that you have enough positive emotion in your life. So whether if you're someone who works a lot of hours, for example, and finds it very difficult to get anything during the day that will boost your spirits a little bit, then begin to look at how you can take 10 minutes someplace and do something. Maybe make a list of activities. Maybe it's just listening to a piece of music or reading something you enjoy or talking to a friend on the phone or face-to-face. But identify for yourself what are a few activities that really give you a lot of pleasure in your life, and then begin to constructively filter those into your day and your week.
That's why the self-awareness is so important, right? You first have to sit down really and think about what truly fulfills you and think about, am I doing enough of those things in my life? Because like we said earlier, people are unique. What fulfills one person may not fulfill you. So you have to think about, some people feel fulfilled and happy when they are perhaps with their loved ones or with their friends, doing some sort of activity together. Other people may find it from reading a book or listening to music. So really schedule these things in your life. Yeah, flow activities, some people call it. Yeah. And that purpose and meaning is quite huge as well. People talk about all the time, that passion and the purpose in life, that one thing that, say, once you've identified, really kind of like is the pole star that kind of like anchors you and propels you forward. What is your perspective on discovering that purpose for yourself?
Well, I think it takes some people know it quite early. I've worked with children who knew by age 9 what it was, but that's very unusual. Most people, it takes them well into adulthood to really identify what the meaning and purpose is. And I think my own experience is it's quite challenging, I think, in our context, because parents often in our culture direct so much of what is purposeful and meaning for people. And many young people don't feel like they can really move out on their own for what is meaningful and gives their lives purpose, in a collectivist society. Because
hemmed in by obligations.
Sometimes people feel really constrained by their social obligations, and it's not until they're into their 30s or 40s that they really feel like they can break free and say, I really don't want to do that. This is what I want to do with my life.
Yes, yeah. It's a journey you have to embark yourself at your own time. But I think the most important thing is not to pressure yourself too much. We're all different. We're all human beings, and we all experience different things at different stages of our life. The important thing is to be aware of what's happening, and then just take those steps, towards finding that purpose or happiness, Eugene, for yourself. Thank you very much, Maureen. And if you want more advice from Maureen as well, she's she's gathered all her experience and research over the past 30 years, researching on well-being and happiness into this book that's called Happiness is a State of Mind. And this book is mine as well. Maureen has just kindly given it to me as well. Thank you very much, Maureen, for that. And, everyone desires happiness, and it's not as elusive as we think, you say, Maureen. Yeah?
That's right.
All detailed in this book as well. So pick it up. It's in the bookstores as well. Maureen, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks very much, Eugene.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to be here.
Maureen Neihart is Associate Professor of Psychological Studies, Academic Group at the National Institute of Education in Singapore. And if you'd like to share something with me as well that will help improve our well-being or fulfillment in any way, give me a call or email me rather. That's probably better. Email me at eugene@mediacorp.com.sg. I'm Eugene Low, and this has been a Slice of Life Hour on 938 Live. Thank you so much for joining me today.